clear. That would
Yeah,
make...
we can hear you right now. I'm just waiting for your Twitch stream to load.
Cool.
Yep.
There we go. It's up now.
All right. Awesome.
Oh yeah, there we go. I see.
Yeah, I just came up.
Cool. All right. What I'm doing here, in case you're wondering, is I'm doing this weird energy thing in the crystal ball, or and I actually wanted to make cracks at first. And if you're wondering what this is, it's actually a paint effects brush for cracks. I was all like super excited about it, like, ooh, I'm gonna make cracks through my crystal ball with a paint effects brush. But it didn't quite work as planned. So now I'm thinking these would be a cool like energy crackling, energy crackling inside of the crystal ball. So I'm trying to turn my accidents into happy accidents, you know, like Bob Ross, right? Oh, those are the trees, happy trees. Well, these are going to be happy accidents, okay? So we're going to use a mesh light on this guy as well. Why not, right? So in the rendering shelf, we have these old lights. Some of them still work well. Never touch the ambient light. Pretend that doesn't exist. Just ignore that first one. But here in the Arnold shelf, these are the lights you really should be using as much as you can. These are optimized for Arnold. These are all physically accurate lights. So we'd like to use these as much as we can. And the question is, well, how do I want to create this glow inside here? Do I want to make a mesh light? Because this is what I accidentally hit the render button. Didn't mean to. Well, back to the question. Do we want to make this a mesh light, which is what we did earlier, and that works well for creating a glow, but I'm going to tell you right now, mesh lights are very resource intensive. They take a while to produce the right sampling, and it's just a lot. So the second icon is to make a mesh light. I could do that, and I could, what goes with green? We could do some other weird, let's see, bright yellow glow inside of the green maybe, or yellow green-ish. Do this really fast because I gotta move on to other stuff, but I just kind of wanted you to see the method to my madness here. So can we just render only this and nothing else? Yes, we can. Hopefully you remember from last class. If we go into our render settings, rather our render window, we go to our render dropdown, use this checkbox. This is going to save you a lot of time. Render only selected objects, right? So in this case, I could just render, for example, the crystal ball and what's in the crystal ball, and just the cracks, and maybe just the mesh light. And if I just render that, that's really going to save me on render time. Make sure it's selected, make sure that checkbox is on, render selected objects only, and then use render region. I'm rendering down here at 640 by 480, but hey, you guys should be rendering, oh, I'm just still getting the green. If I look carefully, it's in there, but it's not bright enough. So let's do something a little different. So if I can see it, I feel like I can crank up the intensity to the point where the mesh light is going to be much brighter. And let's do something crazy, like the hot pink thing was kind of humorous, but purple actually does, believe it or not, work pretty well with green as a complementary kind of color. And if the intensity was crazy, remember I like to use powers of 2, which is an old habit. So now that's now a 32 intensity, and we can see how it plays against the green. It may be that I want to either up the transmission, so I might want to make the green mesh light less intense. I might want to lower the opacity on what's around it. The point is, this stuff is really expensive, and I'm supposed to be doing UVs. So mesh lights, for the record, very expensive lights. So they're great for making a glowing light source. They're fantastic for that. But if you're trying to do something like really complicated tendrils, then maybe it's a little bit much. And also because we got to get to UVs anyway. So this is maybe, yeah. Oh, or maybe they're just not selected. Looks like it is, but nothing around it is. So you've got to always when you have that checkbox on, make sure to have everything selected that you want to render. There we go. Better. I'm going to leave this alone for right now because, well, let's just do one more. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. 320, 10 times the intensity. Don't be shy. Numbers don't matter. I just want to see the thing happen. And then shift select everything that you want to render. Render only the selected objects. Use only render region. Hopefully you'll start to see something interesting. In this case, I think I'm just forcing a little bit too much. Throwing, oh, no. I'm seeing what I want. That kind of cool effect is what I was after. Cool. All right. I think I've done enough with my crystal ball. We got to move on to UVs. Sorry, I just had to try that out. I was curious to see what I could do with that. I've rearranged my table a little bit, but I want to talk about UVs and wood and so on. So what do we do? How do we make UVs? How can we make this look good? Every object should have UVs. So select the object you want to add UVs to. Let's look at them. Display, polygon, UVs. Okay, that's displaying it in this view, but actually, come on, F8. Select. That was weird. Let's try that again. I'm sorry. Window modeling editor, UV editor. My apologies. So this is what my UV map looks like. That's my table, right? And that's the UV map that the cube comes with by default. So when we make a cube, it looks basically like this. So this is how it works. If I hit the 6 button in the viewport, we know 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is the textured view. And when I hit the 6 button, you should see all the textures in your viewport. It's a little sluggish right now, but there it goes. So then now I can see the wood on the table. So these UVs are, again, mapping how the texture falls onto the table. Logically, if I move the UVs around, I hit F12, by the way. F12 is my UV selection. I'm actually selecting UVs. You can select them here or here. Doesn't really matter where you select them. You can select them in the UV editor, or you can select them over here. But check it out. Now that they're selected and I move them around, I can just move the UVs around. And as I move the UVs around, watch what happens. As I stretch the UVs here, notice how the wood gets stretched here. So these UVs that I have selected are determining basically how the wood grain falls on the table. So that's kind of the fundamentals of how UVs work. Let's say I want to fix this. I don't know what's going on with my grapes. They're like magically floating around right now. Okay. I must have selected something over there, but by accident. So back to UVs. How can we fix this table and maybe get more control over how the wood falls on here? Like, what can we do about this? Select the object and figure out, how do I, again, want this wood to fall on the table? Well, mostly I want to pay attention to this horrible stretching down here. Hopefully you can see what I mean about the vertical stretching. It looks terrible. This is the kind of stuff we need to fix with better UVs, and this becomes the big sort of problem area. Because this thing was made from a box, one thing we could try is we could try and use a box projection. This is going to be under your modeling module, your UV menu. And we actually have, oh, well, they took out the box projection. Now we just have cylindrical and planar. Thanks, Maya. No more box projection for you. Automatic is automatically going to create a box around it. It thinks that there's a UV projection from every angle, in this case 6 angles. If I go back and look at this now, what does my UV editor look like? That's what my new UVs look like. If this works for you, then great, fantastic. If you're like, yeah, that fixed everything, done, finished. Only took one click, man, super fast. if that's the case, I'm not going to give you bad or wrong information here. Then go with it, roll with it, if you're happy with it. But that's a giant hack that doesn't always work. And I want to repeat that. Sometimes it works, oftentimes it doesn't. And so what I just did is I automatically created UVs. I repeat, if it looks good in the render, roll with it. Most likely it won't. So how would we do it sort of the right way instead? Well, the right way would be maybe to select the top of the table only. Only the top of the table, and then perhaps project just the UVs from the top of the table down. Note that the sides look pretty good here though, and we want the sides to wrap logically around to the top of the table. So we could use a planar projection, which would project straight down. That would mean this kind of treats it like a projector screen. If you imagine this is the screen and I'm projecting straight onto it, then that would be your planar projection. In this case, like in the y-axis. So if I go to UV and I go back to planar projection, I still can't believe they took out the box project, but they left the cylindrical and spherical. But whatever, Autodesk. Whatever floats your boat. So y-axis, we're projecting down along the y-axis, so I can change this to y-axis and click apply. And you can see that when I do that, I even have like this widget that I can scale. Look, when I scale the widget, you can actually see the wood grain scaling with it. Let's take a look at the UVs. Again, this is under Window, Modeling Editor, UV Editor. Make sure the object is selected. You should be seeing it. There it is. And so these are my new UVs that I've just projected straight down from the top, which, hey, guess what? If you're just doing a tabletop and you don't see anything else, then great. Look, my tabletop looks awesome. Looks great. But then if we begin to see the sides of the table, we still have now the stretching problem. It's back again because my UVs are only coming down from the top. Again, if we look at it in the UV view, we can clearly see the problem that the sides of the table are not represented at all. And this sort of photo is being projected straight down, just like if the table was a projector screen and the table texture was a projection on that screen, it's just straight down onto it. So that's a pain in my butt. So the way that we would logically then fix this is we would try and unwrap this somehow. So bear with me, this is where the hard part comes in. Watch how this works. You would select an edge loop. So F10, if you're using your F keys, which hopefully you are, and select an edge loop that goes all the way around where the table bends. Like you notice this is like a 90-degree angle. Now under UV, we want to cut these edges. So we say cut UV edges. By the way, we can do this in the UV view or in the 3D viewport, but we want to cut those edges so that, and like I'll show you again where that is, under Window, Modeling Editor, UV Editor, here, cut and sew. Cut is Shift X. So if you want to be cool and use the shortcut, it's Shift X. Now what that's done, and by the way, we would like to do that around every big angle, like that. So Shift X, it has to be in the viewport when you do this, Shift X. So note that I'm doing this sort of around the big changes in angle. So Shift X. By the way, I don't think the shortcut, not what I wanted. I don't think the shortcut works in the 3D viewport. You have to do it here. So again, Shift X. But as long as you've cut, now you're going to see, and the bottom doesn't matter because we're never going to see the bottom. At least it's unlikely. So what you don't see, don't worry about. But now we have multiple UV shells. You can't see that they're multiple UV shells. You have to kind of pull them apart. Here's how we can do that. F12 is your UV shortcut. Note now I have a UV that I can like literally move around here in the UV editor. But we want to select the whole shell. So one of these, if I hover over, let's see, where is it? shell borders. No. Well, to select the shell, this is the way I do it anyway. Let's turn all these off, go back to where we were. To select the shell, well, I have a specific way I do it. So I select one UV, and then I use Shift right click, and I say, oh, sorry, Control right click rather, to UV shell. So I'll say that again, and now I've separated my shells out. So I'll do that again. Select one UV, Control right click, to UV shell. And now you can see the different separate shells I have. All these shells should be packed inside of this UV space, ideally. So, and not only that, but we want to try to pack it as efficiently as possible. So if we were to select these, we have a layout feature under, hold on, tools, layout, where is it? Well, again, a lot of these I use, oh, sorry, it's down here under unfold. So it's Control U. And so if you need, for example, to unfold your UVs because you're dealing with cloth, you could do it this way. You may get some unpredictable things with this table, as you can see right now. Pretty interesting stuff. But this is how it's unfolded properly. If we want to pack these shells, we could select them all. I use Shift right click, and I use layout along U and V. So this is one way to fix your UVs, but you're going to see that it's through an algorithm. So for one thing, you've lost the kind of perfect edges here. These may not correspond with these. And you're kind of starting to see right off the top why UVs are a huge pain in the butt, just because you have to deal with all these variables. Now, if you look at your table, I guess the real question is, does it look better or any good? I mean, I think it looks pretty good, but we don't know where these UV seams are. And if you start to see seams and you're texturing, then you know your UVs are bad. If you see stretching, you know your UVs are bad. Under the table is actually going diagonal right now. So if we could see under the table, we might be upset that everything is diagonal. And I don't know what happened to my grapes. They're really like having a bad day or something. Anyway, back to doing this this table. So the cat is actually snoring next to me, so forgive the cat snoring, I guess. So if we're doing an organic object like a human, this stuff all makes sense. But since we're doing a fairly sharp-edged thing, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do it this way. We don't want our UVs to necessarily be overlapping, but having said that, if the bottom of the table and the top are the same, it doesn't really matter if we don't see it. Meaning that whatever we don't see shouldn't really matter very much. So the underside of the table, we don't see it, doesn't matter. But if we see even these guys a little bit, then it's probably not a bad idea to make a UV shell for anything that you see. So I'm going to go back to my face mode for a second here. I don't know why I'm in cut mode, but I'll go back to my face mode. There we go. And select the side of the table. And I mean, really technically, we should get like the entire side, everything, if at all possible. You know, like that. See, this becomes a trick. If you double click, you're going to get all of the faces. So it becomes, selection becomes even a problem. Like, how do I select what I want specifically? So remember the trick here. Select one face, double click, and then you get those faces selected. And here's yet another trick, right? If we hit Command or Control F10 selects edges, Control F11 selects faces. So this becomes one side of the table, and if you accidentally select something, hit Control to deselect. So this becomes one side of the table, and maybe we want to project a planar project, or here's a crazy idea. We can even make UVs based on the camera angle, meaning that like I can actually go up here to UV and say camera-based projection. Heck, there's even a best plane option now, which is pretty cool. Right there, best plane. So if I wanted to fix this the right way, like I said, I would select the plane or the planar part of the table. Again, don't select the stuff that wraps around, but just what exists on one plane. Like if this exists on one plane, note right now, like you can see hopefully that the wood grain is stretched vertically, but now if I project from maybe the camera and now I click off of it, look how much better now that is. Everybody see how I fixed that? Hopefully you can see how the wood grain now makes a lot more sense. So anything that's, I'm seeing it stretched, see how up here this hasn't been fixed? So see it's all stretched vertically because it hasn't been fixed. And it's like, well, how do I fix that? Well, I want to make another planar projection. And if you could planar project just on that axis, then you'd be fine. But if you can't find the axis, like maybe the table's been rotated in some weird way, you can actually project from the camera angle as well. I can literally project from the camera angle that I'm looking at, and all of the faces on this side of the table. So let's see if we can select it. What's the fastest way to select this? Selection problems. Welcome to Maya. How do we select something like this? Well, if we can't see it, well, in the front view actually, look. So if I go to my front view, why is everything so slow right now? It's like dog slow for some reason. Oof, man. I have a feeling that running Twitch in the background, because it's video, it's like video feedback or something, I don't know, might be slowing down a lot. Because Maya just doesn't want to behave now. Oh, I don't know. Frustrating. Okay, so if we go to the wireframe view, in the front view, I can kind of select these vertices, I think, if Maya wants to behave. Man, I'm about to say save the file is where I am with this right now because I'm so frustrated. Save your file, kids. And if you don't know this, really go to the Save Scene option box. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Turn on iterative save. So if you have not turned on iterative save, then turn it on. I mean, really, go to File, go to Save Scene, go to Option Box, turn on your incremental save. I cannot emphasize that enough. Please do that. If you haven't done it already, do it. Tabletop. Select. Okay. Now, back to what I was saying. F9 for vertex mode. Select these and see from the top view. If I hit F, those are all selected. And you can even see in the perspective mode they're all selected, right? So if we want to change the selection, we can hit Command F11 and then those faces are all selected. But if we wrapped around a little bit too much, you can kind of see here we went around the edge a little. That's easy enough. I hold down Control to deselect these vertices. Oh, come on. Deselect. Oh my God, really? Control, deselect. Holy crap, Maya. Let's do it in this view. Controlled. Well, it's probably because I'm not. It thinks for some reason I'm in face mode. Oh, there we go. Yeah, make sure you're in vertex mode. So once I go back to F9, there we go. Now, Control F11. I finally have the faces selected that I wanted to select to begin with. And I can make another planar projection from here. And again, if you can't do it from a perfect side view like this, so X actually does make sense, then you could do it from a camera view. So whether or not you make your UVs based on your camera. There's camera-based projection. Or you make it planar. Planar's fine as long as you know what axis. I can see that this is along the x-axis, so I'm projecting this along the x-axis. Man, these grapes, man. I don't know what's going on with these grapes. They're like having a bad day today for some reason. It's weird. They need to be put in their place. Bad grapes. Yeah. I guess I'm just going to have to manually put them back. So why is it doing this? I'm not sure. It's not a big deal. Center the pivot point, modify center pivot. Put the grapes back to where they're supposed to be. And, you know, delete the history. Because usually something like that usually means that there's some kind of weird history. Oops. There's some kind of weird history involved. The grapes got a bad history, man. It's terrible. So I feel like I still have a lot of overlapping geometry, but I'm not going to worry about that just right now. I'll delete the history. Edit, delete by type history, Alt-Shift-D. Hopefully that fixes my problem so it doesn't just randomly move around. How is my table looking right now? Well, I haven't gotten rid of the stretching on this side or this side, but obviously fixed the stretching there. But again, haven't fixed the table on the edges here. I feel like the texture projection didn't work properly. That's how you're supposed to do it. If you can get away with automatic unwrapping and it looks good, I have to say, truthfully, that you can use it. I hate to do it that way, but it may give you a lot of seams. I just want to warn you. So if you go back and look at your UVs, window, modeling editor, UV editor, you're probably thinking, this is cheating if you're just automatically unwrapping your UVs. And I'm here to tell you, there's no such thing as cheating. So, at least in 3D, if it looks good and it renders well, that's all that matters. All these UV shells are packed very nicely here. You can see they're packed very efficiently. And you can move them around yourself however you want. I personally think there are too many UV shells. But notice for every planar object on the table, we have a different UV shell. So what I want to do here right now, because I don't want to run out of time, is I want to unwrap something that maybe is a different shape. So again, you can planar project each side of the table. So if you didn't get that, or if that wasn't very clear, because sometimes I wonder how clear things are, you can select the faces on every plane and project the UVs one side at a time until everything is fixed. Or if you get lucky and your automatic unwrapping produces something that looks good in the viewport and renders well, and you don't see any obvious UV seams anywhere, then I guess go for it. Click off the object and look around, because you might notice that there are actually very obvious UV seams. That's very common. I'll show you what I mean in a second with this next object. So what I want to do is I want to make a Coke can, or I don't know, Pepsi can, or whatever. Take your pick. So I make the table live. And after making the table live, I make a cylinder. Then I add some subdivisions. And then I add some caps. And probably if I hit the 3 button right now, it's not going to look too much like a Coke can. But, excuse me, as we know, insert your edge loop tool. That's a left click, Maya, not a right click. Still thinks it's a right click. As I was saying, pull up some edge loops to think about the bevel of your Coke can. Hit the 3 button. That's a little better. Okay. 3 button. Cool. So, really quick. How do we make UVs for this? Again, you're going to get UVs with the object when you create it. all primitives come with UVs. That's fact. So if we go to Window, Modeling Editor, UV Editor, you're going to see, hopefully, if you select the object, these are the current UVs. If this works for you, great, but most likely it will not. Most likely. So also note the UV seam is right here. So one thing I always want to tell you guys, if I go to my render camera, make sure the seam isn't visible. So if you want to rotate this until the seam is not obvious, right now the seam is very, very obvious where the seam for the texture will be. Whereas if I rotate this so the seam is not visible, then I've just suddenly solved my problem. So let's say that these UVs are usable. Let's pretend for a second. Maybe they are. I don't know. Can we get away with it? brandsoftheworld.com. It used to be brandsoftheworld.com. I think it still is. So you can download your logos here. Some student told me there was another place to do this, by the way, but this is where I usually go. So if I want a Coke can label, it's easy enough to find it here. Things are weirdly slow on this computer, so bear with me. I suspect it's because the Twitch... Having the Twitch tab open weirdly slows everything down, and I never did understand why, but... I suspect it's because the Twitch... Having the Twitch tab open weirdly slows everything down. It's Twitch inception. Ah. Okay. I can at least now see the... Oh, God. All right. I can see the chat window, so that's good. Oof. Oh, it's so painful. There's too many things going on. All right. So much stuff going on that my cursor is now dragging on my screen. Very annoying. And my roommate's home. Hey, Charles. Hey, Charles. Oh, Charles, this is taking up so many resources that my cursor is now lagging. I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to start the stream over or what, because even the cursor now is... You should always start the stream over? I don't know if that's going to solve the issue. Oh, really? It's lagging so hard, it's kind of hard to deal with. And I don't know why. It seems to be when I turn, like, literally look at the Twitch feed tab is when I have the problems. It's the weirdest thing. So I need to keep the tab open to look at the chat at this point.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
but your buddy.
Yeah, the cat was snoring a minute ago. It was funny. I had to say to the class, please excuse the cat snoring next to me.
I told you he snored.
Yeah, it's true. True story. Okay, guys, for those of you listening, hopefully you're listening to this. So if I open this image in a new tab, here's my Coke label. If this fits my UV shell, this might be okay. This seems very compressed. I don't know if you can see all the compression artifacts, but let's see if we can find one that doesn't look quite so compressed. Try to use textures that are at least 1024. That doesn't mean it has to be print size. You know, 1024 or above should be fine for most things. This is still the compressed one, I think. I feel like that's the one we just looked at, but maybe not. Oh, man, slow. Everything's so slow. Right-click, open image in new tab. Okay, that's better. Good enough. Now, save this into Photoshop. The way I like to do it is to right-click, copy image. Then I'll go to Photoshop. Then I'll make a new document, like so. And I'll paste it in. Come on, come on. Everything's so slow. Now, important part, guys. Like, I hope you're freaking taking notes right now, because this is the important part. I need the UVs here, so that I can either stretch the UVs around the label or stretch the label around the UVs. I don't care. It's your choice. Pick your poison. It can go either way. So now, what do? We take the UVs from here, which might be okay right now, or they might not. But let's see what we can do. These are my current UVs. Old school, by the way, says that you can just take a snapshot of this by using print screen. I think that's a little bit silly in 2020, but it still works. We instead have actually a snapshot button up here. That's this icon. And there is a gotcha right now, and the gotcha is you got to have the object selected. I know that sounds funny, but if you accidentally select a different object like I just did, note that the UVs go away. Make sure the object is green. Make sure the object is selected. And I know everyone right now is going like, duh, no kidding. But really, it's surprisingly easy to select something else with this dialog button or this menu up. So just trust me on this. Now decide where you want to save your UVs. I don't know where are we gonna save the UVs. We'll call this Coke can. I always add UV to the end. And this is going to be your texture resolution, which is a little bit high, but I'll go with it. 1024 minimum, so this is twice that, right? 2048. Now we click apply and make sure it's going to the right folder. 3D Studio Section 2, Coke UV, click apply. Okay, we got it that time, good. And now in the Photoshop, open that up. If you're using Maya's IFF file format, you might encounter a very weird thing right now. And that is that when you open this up, well, I have too many things on my desktop. It's ridiculous. There we go. So when we open this up, if it's an IFF file, you're going to see a transparent background, which is a huge pain in my butt. So just fair warning, if you see this, don't panic. It's not a big deal. Go to your layer palette here. I don't know why it's like that. I'll put it up here. It's fine. I just want to see my layers. Okay, cool. So now put a new layer underneath it and make that layer black. And you'll see that actually Autodesk did a clever thing by making the UVs kind of gray. So whether or not you put black or white back there, if I invert it to white, you should still be able to see the UVs, which is actually kind of clever. But either black or white, you should just very much be able to see your UVs regardless. So then, I don't care, whichever one you want. Then go to your Coke label, and if you guessed stretch or position the Coke label over your UVs, then you guessed correctly. So now we have the texture kind of under the UVs. You can see my UVs are here. And if it's hard to see, you can always invert by hitting Command I to invert your UVs. I can invert my background too. It might be easier to see what you're doing that way. Just so you can line your texture up so that your texture actually flows across your UVs. But this is the important part here, guys. Please pay attention here, really. You always want your UVs to maybe go a tiny little bit beyond you always want your texture, rather, to go a little bit beyond your UVs. So I'm actually trying to pay careful attention here, to have the red go a little bit past the UVs. So like when you were really little and they said, don't use your crayons past the lines, stay in the lines. Think of this as like the opposite. You actually would like your texture to go just a tad bit, like a couple pixels beyond the UVs, because if your color texture is within the UV shell, you're going to see that gap. You're going to see like whatever that color is, white in this case, and you're going to see a crazy gap or white seam everywhere. And we don't want that. So we turn off the UVs, we save this as our Coke texture, and we'll just take a look. How does this look, I use PNG, you could use BMP. I'm going to go with PNG, and I like using TXT for texture at the end here, so I know what the heck this is supposed to be. Now we go back into Maya. What kind of material should we be using right now? Who can tell me? Somebody speak up so I know you're here. I'm not just howling into the void. That's what I usually feel like. See, nobody says a word. What kind of material, guys?
You mean like just like wood or metal or?
Yeah, well, I mean like what material in Arnold.
The standard AI.
You got it. The standard surface is what I was looking for. So same idea. Yes, the AI standard surface. This is going to be Coke. And then we got to figure out what preset matches Coke can. Anybody want to guess? Balloon? Blood? Definitely blood. Clearly blood for Coke. What do you think? No? Yes?
I don't know, maybe a copper or something?
Copper?
Or that's the only metallic one that I know of besides gold, which is too excessive.
Gold. How about, let's see, car paint? I feel like that's pretty close. Car paint metallic, maybe even. Let's try this. This is what I mean about playing around, right? So try out a preset. If it doesn't work, then guess what? You get to tweak the preset. I'm like really looking. Oh, look, brushed metal. Ooh, I'm gonna go with brushed metal, I think. But maybe the metallic car paint, that might work. Let's just find out. I don't know. I mean, I'm being, I'm not being smart here. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm gonna go with brush metal because I think that's closest. But whatever preset you think is closest is what you should start with, and then tweak these settings from there. So let's just go ahead and feed the color in. This is going to be our new texture that we just created. Don't pay attention to this mess over here because, oh my god, it's a huge mess. If you absolutely must pay attention to this giant mess because you're that person, then right-click on the thumbnail, click Graph Network, and there is your node system. In fact, you can actually see this matches your attribute editor, and you can see that the file here is going to be that Coke texture. The one I just made, right? The one that actually says TXT on the end of it. And then once I feed that in, you should start to see it on your shader ball, hopefully. Don't worry if it doesn't show up perfectly. That's not the point. So let's see how it looks in the viewport. That's actually what's important here. So right click, assign material, or middle click and drag. And what do we get? Oh my god, we got nothing. So right off the bat, it looks like it's at least not in the viewport. It's clearly here in the UV editor, but not in the viewport. Should we really trust the viewport at this point? Anybody have an opinion on this? Trust the viewport, yes or no? Survey says.
Probably not.
No. Absolutely do not trust the viewport. Right? So then we have to basically, I mean, even if we have the 6 button on, I wish I could see it, but I can't. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of rendering, I'm afraid. But let's say render cam, and let's say render the selected object only, and let's hope that it doesn't take forever. Oh, hey, look, I can see it. So I'll zoom in, and wow, that's really, really hard to see for so many reasons, right? So let's, as much as I don't want to render from the perspective, this is an example where maybe rendering from the perspective might not be a bad idea because I don't really want to move my render camera. If we have this viewport selected, we can actually just click the render icon, which is the second slate, and there we go. Hey, look at that. Now I can actually see what it looks like. Oh god, no, I didn't want to dock it. Maya, no, don't dock the render window. Thank you. So now we can see the problem, right? We would like to see this in the viewport, by the way, and I have a kind of a trick that works for that, which I feel like would be a little faster. Well, I'll show you both ways. So render region might be one way to do it, meaning if I go into my UV editor and I begin tweaking my UVs, and this is what I was saying earlier about you can either change your UVs or change your image. This icon turns the image on and off. This picture icon. And is there a slider to actually make it more transparent? Because that would be awesome. No. I thought there was a way to do that. Okay. Well, you can obviously turn the picture on and off here. So again, you either stretch your UVs around the picture or you stretch the picture around the UVs. Like, you just get to decide that yourself. So what happens if I were to move this, like the UVs themselves? So let's say I rotate the UVs, right? I could take this UV shell and I could rotate it. God, assuming I could see rotate widget. Oh, there it is. So if I rotate this, I can immediately see that I accidentally grabbed UVs I don't want. So what do? We use that technique I showed you earlier where I select one UV, I use control right click to UV shell, and that actually allows me to move the UV somewhere else, or in this case what I want to do is rotate it. So I could rotate it like this, just for argument's sake. Whoops, I wanted this here. And I could move this way. And see how I'm moving my UV shell, and as I move and rotate my UV shell, let's now see what the render looks like. And this is again where render region comes in handy. I already know that I want the Coke to be this direction, so obviously rotating it 90 degrees is going to give me the wrong effect, I think. Right? Coke isn't rotated this way, is it? It's going to be vertical on the can. So obviously rotation was wrong, but I have like double the label I want. Sorry, wrong window. So I have still the wrong window. It's obviously the middle one. So I have double the label I want. The label is actually wrong, it's doubled. So once I undo this and get back to where I was, this is the correct orientation. But if I go to Photoshop, right, I only want like half of this, so I don't want this stuff. So back to Photoshop, where are you? Here you are. Turn your UVs back on, and now we can just adjust the image itself. So either you're adjusting the image against the UVs or you're adjusting the UVs against the image. That's really what I want you to get out of this. It's super importante. All right, so I delete that and then try stretching it that way. Hide the UVs, that's important. Save the texture out again. Does this look any better? Let's find out. It might. I'll save over the other file, which you can totally save over the other file if you want. Just make sure to refresh it in Maya. But yeah, it's fine to save over the original file. No big deal. But, oops. Okay, well in this case it's saying, no, dummy, you cannot save over the original file because it's currently in use. If you run into that problem, then don't be afraid to just say Coke can to texture, something like that. Because apparently Maya's using it. Okay, well, whatever. Now we go and we just reconnect it to the right one. So we can go into the attribute editor, or you can go into your hypershade. Either way, just make sure in the color channel that you're connecting it to the new guy, right? Because we have a secondary one now. It's called Coke Can 2. Now, there it is. Does that work any better? Let's check. We go back to the render window. Obviously, that's wrong. We know it's not an orientation issue. So now we'll use render region again and hope that your camera didn't move. Hey, look at that. Now I'm getting more the results that I want. I don't think I want the label there either. But hopefully this is making sense to you guys that what you want to do is adjust the image against your UVs. And if the UVs aren't working, then make better UVs. That's like the best advice I can give you as far as that's concerned. You can use the automatic unwrap, but I'm here to tell you that that only works less than half of the time. You're going to end up with UV seams in the wrong places and so on and so forth. So, whoops. So I'll give you guys a list of rules to keep in mind when you're creating your UVs. And we'll be doing this, we'll probably be doing this, I suspect, even next class, because a lot of you guys, your head's probably exploding right now. Like, what is this? And why do I have to learn this? And it is absolutely the bane of so many 3D artists, like UVs. Holy crap, this is so painful. People actually do this and get paid to do this. And yeah, it's a thing. And it is definitely one of the more painful parts about 3D is adjusting your UVs and or adjusting your texturing against your UVs. There's a lot of auto UV tools at this point. Obviously, there's some automatic unwrapping inside of Maya, and if that works for you, then great. You consider yourself lucky. But there's also automatic unwrapping tools both in ZBrush and in 3D Studio Max and pretty much everywhere at this point. I even noticed the other day that there's automatic unwrapping tools within the Unreal Engine. So almost every software right now that's 3D has some kind of automatic unwrapping. It's true. True story. Now I'm getting something much closer to what I want. But just because you auto unwrap something doesn't mean it's going to like look good. And oftentimes it doesn't. Just fair warning. I'm running out of time. I'm going to scale this to closer to what I think it should be. I need kind of photo reference for this to really make this work. Oh, as always. And I'm going to just render the whole damn thing. Well, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to see what I'm going to do here is I have my Coke can selected. I want to go back to render selected objects. Only phone bad. No, sorry. And now, again, with just that object selected, render selected objects. Hopefully this doesn't take very long. So now the question is the label being rotated towards me? Which it is not. Well, I'm rendering from the wrong view probably. Make sure you're rendering from the render can. There we go. Oh, maybe it is facing me. Oh, it looks like it is, but it looks like the scale is still wrong. So at this point, you either scale the image or scale the UVs. I know I keep repeating myself, but it's up to you which one. Now, something you might find faster and easier than this, so I like to show you multiple ways, and I'm just about out of time. So if you want to start, I know that the Lambert is wrong, bad, wrong, Lambert, don't use the Lambert, right? Yes, don't use the Lambert. You want to use the AI standard surface. But guess what? If you plug this texture in to a Lambert default material, the advantage is, guess what? We can actually see this in the viewport with the 6 key. See, now I can clearly see that it's not what I want. And I can either adjust my UVs or I can adjust my image against my UVs to shrink the logo down, for example. And then once you get either the image shrunk or expanded to fit the UVs, or vice versa, maybe you tweak your UVs, then you want to change this again to the AI standard surface. But while it's here as just a Lambert, it's maybe a little bit easier to tweak because you can see a little bit better in the viewport with the 6 button. So it's like, okay, I want just my UV view, and I'm almost out of time. So if you guys have questions, say something, please. I know it's a lot to try to get these UVs done and the texturing done for next class, but a lot of your downloaded objects should already have the UVs done and should also already have the texturing done. So it shouldn't be as difficult for you to deal with those objects. The ones that you've made from scratch, try to use what I've taught you today to create UVs for the objects that you've made from scratch. Note, see, if I scale my UVs here, look what it's doing. Scaling my UVs is making the texture get bigger. If I scale the opposite way, then logically the Coke label is going to get smaller. So then I could go into Photoshop, for example, and make the background red if I wanted to. You know? And if I make the background red, it actually makes a lot more sense. We're about at 3:20. It's 3:19. So I'm going to stop the stream. I hope this gives you a rough idea of how UVs work. We can definitely pick up more stuff about UVs. But like I said, see how if I scale my UVs, see how the texture changes. So you have, again, 2 choices. Pick your poison. Either adjust your UVs to the image, or more likely you want to get some nice clean UVs that don't overlap or that are packed very tightly within the 0 to 1 space. And then once you have your UVs created, take a snapshot with this photo UV snapshot icon, then take the UVs into Photoshop and then begin to lay your textures across your UVs. And I mean, a surefire way to make this work, although it is kind of cheating, is to, of course, use automatic UVs. But I will warn you, if you go this route, then you may end up making a lot more seams than you really want. Because automatic will create maybe 10 UV shells when you only need 2. Or automatic might create 100 UV shells when you only need 3, or whatever. So it doesn't give you any control. I have to stop there, so I'm sure we'll go ahead and pick up UVs again next class. There's a lot to it, and it can be a little bit intimidating. So just do your best. It's all I can ask. But there's my cocan texture.